if I hire Heidrick and Struggles. Nobody's going to fire me if I hire Heidrick and Struggles to do this search. So that's one thing that he was able to do with some of these concepts. More return calls from better candidates with credibility statements in your messaging. My name's John Smith. I recruit in IT, and you may have read my article within the IT management, whatever it is. You mention some sort of credibility statement, and then quicker access to leadership, and of course gravitas in the room. And guess what? You'll make more placements that are easier and quicker to close, and you will get paid sooner. Why is that? Because your clients want you on their side. I can always tell how much a client appreciates me by how quickly they pay, which is always nice. So who are these strategic alliance partners? I'm going to give you some concepts, some fundamentals that'll take you down what I did on a step 1, step 2, step 3 level. And you can replicate that also. I promise you that. I promise you this works. Who are these people? People that work at trade associations. Think of NPA as a trade association. I know it's a private enterprise. As a trade association for the recruiting industry, you have vendors, you have consultants, people that consult to the recruiting industry. There are organizations just like that within your industry niche. And what do many of them have? They have webinars, they have programs, they have newsletters, they have regular communication with their constituency. That is the water hole where people within your industry niche gravitate. And this has been an underutilized resource that I've seen among people in the recruiting industry. I don't know why that is. This is a telephone business, and it never will stop being a telephone business. Just like the IT recruiting company executive, the founder that hired me, he saw it's a people business. It is. But when you call up someone and they've already heard your name, when you speak at a conference, here's what happened to me. There's a big law firm, Latham and Watkins, huge, huge firm. They're one of the most profitable law firms in the world. Years ago, I tried to reach out to them. I'm nobody. I remember the person that was there at the time. Who are you? Why should we work with you? I'd never gotten that before, but from them, I can understand why. I didn't work with them anymore. There was a free, meaning I didn't get paid, speech opportunity I had at a trade association for legal. Within the law firm side, there's a trade association of law firm recruiting people. I got invited to, actually, I wasn't speaking, I was on a panel. Me and actually one of my clients had an idea for a panel discussion, and I thought that's great. It was me and her, and also the facilitator of the panel. I live in Richmond, Virginia. The conference was in Vancouver, Canada. There are no direct flights from Richmond, Virginia to Vancouver, Canada. I don't think there's any direct flights to Vancouver anywhere except for Newark. So I had to fly to Dallas. It was a 5-hour layover. And then I finally get it there late at night. And then I had to do the same thing coming back. Was it worth it? It was worth it. Why is that? Because at the end of this 45-minute vibrant conversation, which was very engaging, at the end of it, their new director, global director of partner hiring for Latham and Watkins, runs up to me after the presentation, shakes my hand, tells me who she is, and I'm like, oh yes, you're the new lady there that's been blowing me up. I didn't say that. Shakes my hand and says, we're having a party tonight. I really want you to come, and I'd really like for you to work with us. And I said, that's great. I'm going to be in New York in a couple of weeks. Let's meet. She said, yes. This is what she said. Yes, 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 yes. I'd love that. I don't get that anywhere else. But that's what I got from a prospective client. Why is that? Because I spoke on that panel. Because I had a strategic alliance partner that referred me to this client that I got to know, and I built some trust, and she invited me to sit on this panel as a credentialed, bona fide expert on recruiting. And that was the result. Was it worth it? Absolutely. So that's one. Ding. And there's a lot you can do with that we can talk about later. Sponsors at trade associations. Why would that be interesting? Well, because they have a list, and they have access, and they have a name, and they've already built trust, possibly to the people that you want to get in touch with, in front of. Those sponsors at trade associations, you know what else they have? They've got a budget. That means that they can pay for attention. They've got access. They've got trust. They've been there for years and years and years. It's just like Dave and Veronica and I haven't spoken there in years, but we have trust. It was nice to come on. Hey, how are you? This is great. It's nice to see you. Those sponsors have those kinds of relationships at their trade associations within your industry niche. Who else can be strategic alliance partners? Ding, management consultants. People that do the same thing that you do, but it's not recruiting, it's consulting. They've got to go out there, they've got to get clients, they've got to build trust, they've got to do the work within their client organizations. And the difference between them and us is that their goal is to continue the consulting relationship. Ours is to close the deal because we know there's going to be another one later. But they know how to build a name. Many of them, I think, are more sophisticated than us in terms of client development because that's a very big part of management consulting. But guess what? They have access to organizations. Many times they can bring you in on a project of reorganization, organizational development consulting. We've done an assessment of these 300 people, and we've identified 10% of those that are performing below expectations. And we have an outsourcing placement company that's going to work with them, but we need a retained executive search firm that specializes within this manufacturing niche to come in and help this organization rebuild. And I'd like for you to be my partner because I saw you speak at that conference where you were introduced by my client also that did one deal with you. See, that's how this can go. Social proof. You're building trust. And you become a big deal when enough other people say that you're a big deal. And I'll tell you this, once you're in, you're in. You can definitely earn your way out. But once you're in, you are in, but you still have to continue to showcase your value and your expertise. Also, who else? But wait, there's more. Other experts who are highly visible in your industry. Media, not just social media, but regular media, like blogs. I guess regular media is now considered traditional media because nobody's doing print publications anymore. Some are, but not most. But they still have journalists. They still have editors and senior editors that are scooping for the next story, especially if you work in a large industry like manufacturing or tech or something like that. They have publications, and sometimes it's not necessarily trade associations that write that, but there are independent, privately owned companies that have their own media. They might even do their own events that sometimes compete with trade associations. Think of American Staffing Association and Staffing Industry Analysts. They're kind of like frenemies. But media, podcasters, I'd be willing to bet that if you did a Google search, or even in Apple iTunes, formerly known, or Apple Podcasts, formerly known as iTunes, or the other podcast sources, you can probably find industry-specific podcasters. And then, of course, people that have written books. Books are still a thing, and they usually lead to a podcast relationship if the author has some sort of podcast. And I'll give you some other ideas about how to find these people. But before you do that, I think it's good to kind of take a step back. And what is your own value proposition? What do you have to offer them? This is a sales concept. I always call it the first cardinal rule of human behavior. People do it in their own best interest. It's all about them. Whenever you call up a candidate, you never say, my name's Scott Love. I'd like to recruit you to join an organization you've never heard of and move to a city you've never been to so I can get a placement fee. Are you interested? No. We have to find out what motivates them. What problems are they experiencing at work? What are the challenges that they have? Have they tried to resolve those? No. Why are they still open? What's the criteria of an opportunity that fits them now? Let me tell you about my client's opportunity. That's my recruiting seminar in 30 seconds, by the way. But what do you, as a recruiter, as a search firm owner, what do you have to offer them? Do you have credibility? Do you have ways that you can bring eyeballs to their offering if they're a vendor? Maybe it's let's call it a tech software company that is niched within the medical device industry. And you're a medical device recruiter. What would you have in common with a tech software company that has a niche software product niche within medical device? Well, you want to get access to the same people, decision makers, and you're not competing with them. That's a pretty good, I'd say that's a pretty good formula for an alliance. But what do you have to offer them? I think one thing you have is a solution in terms of intellectual property in your mind that can help their clients solve their hiring problems, I'd be willing to bet that an executive of a small healthcare related software IT company has access to decision makers that have hiring problems. I'd be willing to bet that you offering to do some sort of a program for free for them could get people to pay attention to their offering that they have. And I'll get more specific with this if this is not connecting the dots just yet. But how can you help them reach their goals? So when you think about some strategic alliance partners, you need to step back. What's my value proposition? What do I have to offer them in that relationship? And how can I help them reach their goal? And then third, how can you be useful to them? And I'll tell you this, people do what's in their own best interests. And they're self-motivated until there's a rapport that's really a real relationship where there is some give and take. But at the end of the day, they're still guarding their own interests. And you can never forget that. So let me tell you what I did and what you can do also. And nobody's more amazed than me that this actually worked for me. And I'm a nobody. I mean, I'm just a sales guy who's fun to drink with, but I've got good credit, you know? I'm able to kind of keep it safe and still be interesting, but I don't have the pedigree that a lot of my competitors have. So I'll give you an overview. I have a company called the Attorney Search Group. Pretty simple. We recruit rainmakers for big law firms, and we help law firm partners and associates reach their full potential. But it's really, we recruit rainmakers for big law firms. I think you have to have some sort of a brand. I don't think that if you're brand new to this industry niche, this is going to be the most effective way to get business. There are other things that you need to do, such as MPC calls, things like that. But if you're billing 300K, 500K, you want to get to $1 million, or if you're $1 million and more, these are some of the things that I think can help you. So you have to have an established brand. And then there was a trade association that I joined. What was unique about legal is that we actually have an association of legal search consultants, the National Association of Legal Search Consultants. It's a mouthful. And this is a trade association of people like me. We have maybe 150 recruiting firm members. And I joined this group, it must have been back in 2010, about a year after I got into legal recruiting. And I would go to their conferences and I would meet other members. And at first I was kind of guarded because we're competitors, but then I made some good friendships with people. We're competing, but we had rules and we're not going to talk about names of people, but I've got this issue with this client. Can you help me out? And it was helpful because the type of search we were doing was very niched. There were certain variables that were nuanced exclusively just to our industry niche. As any industry niche has certain aspects that are unique just to that. So one of the things I did, there was a product that I needed for data that I bought called Leopard Solutions, where they have data that they sell to legal recruiting firms and also to law firms. And I used this for a few years, and I got to be friends with the founder, Laura Leopard. And my wife and daughter would go with me to conferences. They got to meet Laura, and Laura got to meet them, and we became friends. And still in business, anytime you're in a business environment and you have a friend, there's always going to be a degree of professionalism that never can leave. You can never become too guarded. I know this is the age people talk about vulnerability. Don't talk about your bad breakups with people in the industry. You don't need to go there, but you can have friends like that. And she became a friend. And so one of the things I proposed to Laura, I said, Laura, I like speaking. How about if I do a webinar for your law firm clients? And she thought that's a good idea. And I had to really develop this. I had to design it. And I kept it like about a half-hour webinar with 15 minutes of questions. And it was specifically to the law firms, which are our clients, and it was to their recruiting teams, not necessarily the real decision makers on who hires candidates. But within my niche, that's a good place to start because you get access to the leadership, but also if you get a recruiting team member that has real authority in that client organization and you build trust and you deliver, then that person knows that they can hinge on you to make them look good because they're self-interested. They want to look good to their boss, to the partners. And so I understood that. And I thought, let's do it for the legal recruiting staff. And we did a program and maybe 20 people showed up, but about 150 to 200 people registered for that. And I saw that and I thought that means that 150 to 200 people had heard of me. And I thought that's pretty good. And we did a few more webinars. And then the list increased to about 1,500 people that would sign up for that. And 150 people would show. And we did that a few times with good results. And so what that means is that this strategic alliance partner, we had trust. She knew I'm not going to embarrass her. I'm going to do a good job delivering content that helps that client prospect, let them look good. And so one of the key points of this is anytime you do anything in terms of your own value prop with a strategic alliance partner and you're delivering content to those prospective clients and candidates, you need to be free with your information and give away content that's going to help them, whether they work with you or not. Because people are self-interested and they only want to get that content if it's going to help them. And you can give them the secrets of the universe, knowing that they're never going to follow all of them. And someone's going to say, those are really good ideas, but I can't do that. I'm calling this recruiter, which is what you want. And another thing I realized, and this is about the time I stopped doing training to the recruiting industry. And I'm like, this is kind of interesting because the more you get in front of your prospective clients, the more they're talking about you, even if they're not within the recruiting department. So I would actually do presentations over COVID for legal associations that had nothing to do with recruiting. But guess what? All of my clients, colleagues are on those calls. So guess what? They're going to go back. Oh yeah, we saw Scott Love speak at a conference. I don't like to talk about myself in third person. That's what they said. We saw Scott Love speak at a conference. He's really good. He's got some good ideas. Well, we should probably consider using him. You become a big deal when enough people say that you're a big deal. And when you do this enough and you do a good job, and if you don't do a good job, don't do it. But if you do it enough, then people start to take notice. And then this must have been right before COVID. I told Laura, I said, why don't I do a series of videos that you can then send out to the legal recruiting teams on some videos of what they can use to help their firms be more effective with recruiting talent. And that was a really good idea. The only downside is I didn't like how I looked in these videos. I've lost some weight. So I'm glad she's not sending those out anymore. But I learned by doing those. If I ever do that again, man, I'm not going to wear a tie anymore. And I'm going to definitely hit the treadmill. By the way, I've done Noom. That thing is amazing. I didn't realize I was eating so much junk. But that's one thing that I did. And what you're looking at these 38 views, that's not a lot. Well, it doesn't matter if it goes to the right people. That's the whole point. It doesn't have to be thousands and thousands of views. If it's just a few dozen people and they're the right people, that's all that really counts. And then other things that I've done with Laura since COVID was, this is this year, yeah. I was actually a master of ceremonies for actually a panel facilitator. I can't remember what she called me, panel facilitator, something like that. This was for, building a lasting legacy, empowering organizations through succession planning. You know how much I've done in the area of succession planning? Nothing. But I earned trust with her that I can understand concepts that relate to law firm growth, which is what exactly I do as a recruiter. And so we did a pre-panel prep session about a week before this for about half an hour. I got to meet Bruce McEwen, who is a management consultant, and also Catherine Rubino, who's a senior editor for Above the Law. And by the way, if you know these people, please don't tell them that they're on this. And so we did that. And then we also did our 1 hour session. There were about she sent that out to a big list. There must have been at least 3,500 people that she sent the announcement to, maybe even more. We had 75 people show up and they stayed throughout the whole hour. It was only around minute 55 that people started leaving because you can pay attention how many people are dropping off. And that was a metric that we used to determine its success. And guess what? It was recorded. And guess what? It was put on YouTube. And guess what? I send this to prospective clients. I send this to existing clients. It has nothing to do with recruiting. Here's a panel discussion I facilitated on succession planning. I thought you might find this interesting. It has nothing to do with headhunting, but who facilitated it? Me. And I was able to keep it going, and I asked good questions, and I didn't check my email during the whole thing. I can't believe that. For the love of God, how did I do that? But I did it. And I paid attention, and it was good. And you know what the best thing that came out of this? Dun, 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 dun. This, us getting to know each other. But you know what was even better out of that? Dun, 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 dun. This guy. Don't call him, please. He's a big deal in the legal world, kind of semi-retired. He's going to be on my podcast. I'll tell you about that in a second. This one relationship with Laura Leopard has been very impacting to me. And by the way, I'm a watercolor artist. She has a leopard painting in her office. Guess who painted that? I did. That's what kind of relationship I like to have with people. I make it a little bit personal, not too personal. But I try to bring the things that are interesting to me into those relationships, just like with any important relationship. And so he's going to be a guest on my show. Let me tell you a little bit about that. An interesting thing happened during COVID over 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago, 4 years this summer. Gosh, has it been 4 years since COVID? I can't believe it. I launched a podcast. It was actually a re-pivot. I know we hate that word pivot. I hate the word pivot. It was a rebranding of a dormant podcast on recruiting that I had. I took the feed that had been dormant for several years, but was still getting 1,000 downloads a month, and I rebranded it to the Rainmaking Podcast. Why did I do that? Because I got tired of candidates moving without telling me that they want to move. I talked to that guy 3 years ago. How come he didn't call me? Well, I don't have an email newsletter because in my niche, they're going to say I'm spamming them. But I wanted to come up with a way that I stayed connected with them without me being spammy. And I looked at what is it that I have? I like to interview people. I like client development. I like sales. What is it that all of my candidates want? I recruit partners. They're rainmakers. They want to be rainmakers. They don't care about calling a headhunter until they want to move, but they care about getting new clients all the time. So I launched this 3.5 years ago. And each week I interview an expert, sometimes an author on client development, sales, whatever you want to call it. It's called the Rainmaking Podcast. Now, it's not specific to legal. It's industry agnostic. So you can check that out. That will help you. I promise it will. So when I talk to a candidate that's not interested, Jerry, it was great talking with you. I know you're not interested in moving right now, which is fine. I want to give you something. They perk up. What is that? Ginsu steak knives? No. I'm going to give you something. I produce a show on client development. You care about growing your practice, right? Sure. Well, I interview experts each week on how you can grow your practice by getting new clients. Wow, that's great. I've got over 100, I think 180 episodes on this now. And so what do you think they think about me? I know something. I can help them. It's selfless. It gives them value right away, whether they work with me or not. Now, one thing I'll tell you this. What does this have to do with strategic alliances? I'll tell you this. I got super lucky with some things. I mean, I got so lucky with this. And guess what? It's a real thing. This is a strategy I kind of fell into. A lot of my guests, about a third of them, are business development coaches for lawyers. I didn't even know there was such a thing. Who are they talking to all day? The same people I want to. Are they competing with me? No. Who trusts them? The people I want to get to know. So they're talking with lawyers all the time, and they know which people are not happy with their firms. So about once a week, who gets a referral? I do. Now, we have an initiative within my company. I've got a VA, I've got a marketing person. I mean, I have to have some infrastructure to manage all this stuff because I'm not doing it. I'm just doing the interview. And I'm not going to go into the details on this, but we're actively having a marketing campaign. We're going to do an email campaign every month to past guests. Here's an alumni resource for you. By the way, here are 2 hot assignments that we have. And let me introduce you to my 2 associate colleagues. So if you have associates that you're coaching that are open to moving, please connect with them. Everybody wins. Guess what? It gives me another reason to attract recruiters with my competitors that aren't doing anything like this, by giving them some brand equity. So let me move on to this. It's also helped me, and I don't do any social media. I don't do any of it. I don't have time for that, except when I post my art, on Insta. I have somebody that works for me 20 hours a week. She does all that stuff. She manages everything. This also led to me building something that has real substance. When I had 150 episodes that were out there, I took this plastic container and filled it with 157 M&Ms and did a video to give a visual of, this is how many shows I have. My dentist got super mad, or maybe kind of happy, because now I got to go see him. 157 shows as represented by each not M&M, Jelly Belly, each Jelly Belly. That's right. They put vitamins in Jelly Bellies. It's true. That's fact. So I did that just to kind of give a visual representation that this is the amount of content that I have that can help you. Help yourself. It's absolutely free. Stumbled on that idea. It also helped me to build other alliance relationships with people that had been on my show that have their own shows. And Dave Ackert, he actually is a management consultant to law firms on strategic growth, business development, and he has managing partner retreats. I've spoken at 2 of them. He and I spoke this week. He's going to invite me to another one, because guess what? I was referred to a firm that wants to do strategic growth. They called me first. I said, I don't think I'm the first person for you to call. I think I can probably help you at some point, but you need to call David Ackert. And he and that guy are talking today. How does David feel about me? And I even talked with him. I said, if you ever come across any groups or even small firms that want to merge into big firms, that's part of my practice. That's really good to know. I might have some people I want to introduce you to. And then another guest on my show, she's a competitor of David's, but also a collaborator. She has a separate conference called the Legal Sales and Service Organization. She's been on my show. 2 of her colleagues have been on my show. So guess what? You think they're talking about me? Wow, he's such a nice guy. Yeah, I got him all fooled, right? So you build a name with strategic alliance partners. So I'm speaking at her conference in June to people in the legal industry. They're not recruiters, they're not lawyers, but they're in the sales end of it. It's on the periphery of where I work. But guess what? You become a big deal when people start talking about you. That's what you want. And I want to leave some time for Q&A also. Let me give you some other pointers here, some other things that have happened just serendipitously about this. 2 of the guests on my show, Henry DeVries and Mark LeBlanc, they're authors, they're full-time speakers. I mean, I wanted to do that, but I like the grind of recruiting. And I really like the grind of recruiting. I like the work. But they're full-time speakers and authors. And they've both been on my show. And Henry reached out to me and he said, we'd like for you and Mark and I to co-author a book together on rainmaking, because they knew that aligned precisely within my podcast focus. And so that's what we did, Rainmaker Confidential. Henry's a strategic alliance partner. So is Mark. I got a book out of that. Guess what? Anytime I meet with a new client, what do you think I bring to the meeting? A copy of my book. And I tell them, this is my strategy. Because I recruit rainmakers, I produce rainmaking podcasts, and I'm also able to use that as a talking point of credibility when I leave voicemail messages to people. I know you get calls from other headhunters, but one thing that's different about me is that I produce this podcast on client development, and that's important for you to know when you make a move to another firm. What I'm really saying is call me before my competition because I'm a big deal. You can't say that. So you have to have credibility statements in your voicemail messages. This was a surprise. I didn't seek this out. And Henry built the website, rainmakerconfidential.com. It's a really good book. Easy read, $20. And I get to keep half of any that I sell. Half go to Henry. That's great. I'm happy. Man, I'll pay him $30 for each $20 copy that I sell. But wait, there's more. This led to me getting introduced to another trade association. Sorry about the low quality graphic, by the way. That was the group that I spoke at in Vancouver. I was referred to their executive director from a strategic alliance partner. And I mentioned Laura's programs that I did, my other strategic alliance partner, in my submission to speak at their conference, which I did one in New Orleans in 2022, and then a second one in 2024. And then what I also did was one webinar for them, and then I have another webinar for them next month. And guess what? With those webinars, those are recorded. And I asked her, is it okay if I send this to firms that are already members of your association? Yes. So what do you think I send to prospective clients after I talk with them? It was nice talking with you. I hope we can talk again soon. By the way, here's a program I did for your own trade association on this particular topic. I hope this can be helpful. Credibility, 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 and trust. That's what you're doing. Started with the strategic alliance relationship. I had no idea it would get there. Some other final thoughts here. I mean, there's so much we could talk about. I've been asked to sit on panels at the National Speakers Association for how did I make my podcast work, things like that. There's another podcast I'm doing now for my industry recruiting association for the legal search consulting community. So guess what? All of my competitors know who I am, which is a really good recruiting tool when I want to grow my search firm in about a year. All my competitors, whenever I post, I'm hiring, guess what? Hey, I don't like my guy. You've got something different. Let's talk. You build a brand. And then what you do, my whole philosophy is whenever you get any sort of media attention, whether it's social media, you want to harvest that over and over and over again. If I get quote, and I've gotten quoted in media, and if you get quoted in media and you have a good quote, guess what? Other reporters, other media, not social media, but I'm talking about traditional stories that journalists within your industry niche publications have to research and write. They see you as a source. And you want to save those. If you see another article, if you have, here's another opinion, here's a contrary opinion to what you wrote, here's another article I was quoted on that can help you if you ever write another one. They keep that in mind. And guess what? They like to reach out to people that they've talked to before. Even major media sees that you've been quoted in industry niche media. I remember when the COVID crisis first hit, because I'd had some traction with this, a reporter from the Wall Street Journal called me. She said, I'm calling you about from the Wall Street Journal. I said, my subscription auto renews, thank you. She said, no, I'm a reporter and I want to interview you and quote you. I said, well, now you have my attention. It was about the bankruptcy. Is bankruptcy increasing? What is the demand for bankruptcy talent? And pre-COVID, before we knew our government could actually do something with what they did, all the bankruptcy lawyers, I mean, they're like, their mouths are salivating. They're like, we're ready. We are ready. It is our time to shine. What is it like in bankruptcy? And I said, it is a frontier free-for-all. Short burst of words with alliteration. She said, my editor really liked that. We're using that. How many times do you have to be quoted in the Wall Street Journal to say you've been quoted in the Wall Street Journal? Once. In every introduction, when somebody introduces you, you've been quoted in the Wall Street Journal. I promise you, that brings a ton of credibility. But wait, there's more. One final thought. Oh yeah, and then post those on your site under thought leadership, quotes and mentions. I created a cohort group, other management consultants, authors, speakers, podcasters that work in legal. Past guests that I'd met through my podcast, I reach out to them. And I said, let's create a mastermind group. One of them does business development coaching and career coaching. The other one does financial planning just for lawyers. Another one does marketing consulting just for lawyers and law firms. Another one does time management and productivity just for lawyers and law firms. There's another professor that's written books like on wellness, well-being. I'm going to invite her into the group. And I said, let's meet each month to talk about speaking opportunities within our industry niche. We're not competing with each other. And then also new podcasts. I was on this show. I'd like to refer you over there. So you develop this synergistic relationship with people and you start to develop momentum and critical mass. Now, we could spend a lot of time on this. I also say leverage your relationships. I'm not going to go into that, but this is a summary. The summary. I created a new word today. I don't know if I should be excited or embarrassed. Summary, connect with those strategic alliance partners, create content that's going to help them, amplify it through your network, Eventually, you'll come up to critical mass, and then you want to sustain it and build it. And then final thoughts before we open it up to Q&A. I decided to do a wee bit of training en masse, seminars, group coaching. I launched a program that Veronica mentioned called the Placement Club. Just go to theplacementclub.com. There's over 20 hours of free content. There's other subscription levels that you can check out as well. But if you join as a free subscriber, every week I do like a 15-minute, every other week it's a very specific recruiting workshop. And then the other weeks I just come on with a live video, quick video tip. I'm doing a live day-and-a-half masterclass in Las Vegas on February 15th and 16th. Go to recruitingisagame.com. That'll take you there. It's limited to just 30 people. And we announced it last week, and it's already a third of the way filled up. I was surprised by that, but I guess people want to go to Vegas. And then a month later, I'm doing a one-day recruiting intensive. That's going to be taking this concept and going pretty deep. It's limited to no more than 10 people. And all the information is on that site as well, onedayrecruitingintensive.com. It takes you to the same page, it's just different parts of it. Check that out and let me know if you have any questions about those. And then Veronica and Dave, I'm happy to open it up to Q&A.
All right. Well, thanks, Scott. That was a lot to take in a short amount of time. So I appreciate your time and your energy there. I do have some questions coming in, which is always awesome when they're ready to go. So first one to get us kicked off is from Emily, and she says, I don't have a podcast yet. So what do you suggest I use as a credibility statement during a voicemail?
I would say that if you go out and you become a guest on a podcast, that's a lot easier. And there's some people, they say, I don't want to do the work of a podcast because it is a heavy lift. Trust me, it's a heavy lift. I would say be a good guest on a podcast. Find out the ones that are in your niche. Look at the ones that you listen to. Are there any guests that you have heard on a particular show? Instead of just contacting that show directly, I would contact that guest and say, I just wanted to tell you, I loved what you said on episode 37 about mental wellness in the IT industry. It made a difference for me, and I just wanted to say thank you. And I'd love to get to know you, connect with me on LinkedIn, and then have questions. It's always good to build a relationship before you come to an ask. And I'd love to be introduced to the host of that show. I actually have a presentation on best practices of hiring IT talent that I'd like to talk to them about. I think it's always good to get a referral. Find out, why do people do business with us? Referrals are the lifeblood of selling. So see if you can reverse engineer a referral that way. Then once you've been on one show, now you have an asset. You can take that, of course, post it on social media, but now you have proof of concept. If it's a good show, then now you can send that to another show. I was interviewed on this. I'd love to do the same program for you on another podcast. And people aren't going to say, well, you've done the same thing there. Why should you do it here? They're going to look at it. Okay, yeah, you've got proof of concept. You're a safe bet. Let's have you on my show also. That's what I'd recommend. Start with that.
All right. Thank you. Shree, go ahead, Dave.
Go ahead, Veronica, if Shree's got a question.
She does. She says she's had some success in client development using these strategic alliance. She says it works, but her question is regarding setting up podcasts. How often do you need to release a podcast to engage folks? Obviously, you know, these are small shops and their time is limited.
Yep. I would say it depends. It has to be on a regular basis. Sometimes once a month, that's not too infrequent. I think it's setting up an expectation for your guest. I would get very clear, though, on what is your goal of your podcast? Is your goal to, and I also think with the topic, it can't be too broad. I think rainmaking, that's not too broad. I've got a friend of mine that has a show that it's kind of, we talk about family issues. We talk about, so here's an example. I had another podcast that I didn't want to tell you about because it didn't get very far. It was called the Partner Podcast. And it was on all things related to partner life, such as mental health, productivity, life balance, and other nonsense. Nobody wanted to listen to that. It was too broad. So one topic, rainmaking. It's not industry specific, but it's really towards legal. So that's what I'd recommend, is get real clear on what your goals are and what your topic is, but also, there's another concept, and Henry DeVries talks about this in his book, The Trojan Horse. If you reach out to a high-level executive with a publicly held company, I'd like to become friends with you and do your search work. They're not going to call you, but if you call them and say, I have a show specializing in the IT industry, and I'd like to interview you on best practices of hiring executive level talent in IT on my podcast. Now you have a reason to build a relationship with someone. There's different avenues with that. It can be direct. It can also be, I'd like to reach out to this trade association executive president to get me, and there's all sorts of different ways. You can actually have a very clear game plan of who is going to be in your network that you want to connect with. And the podcast can be a catalyst. It can be a stimulant to really open up that conversation.
Veronica, I had a question and for Scott. Scott, so I guess it's kind of the mechanics of a podcast. Did you find any great sources for the tools, the methodologies, the recording quality, where it gets posted? I mean, I'm sure you can Google all this stuff, but it would seem that you've already kind of been down that path, and maybe there's some points of reference you could point people to that would save them the steps of trying to figure that out all on their own.
Right. There are organizations like Podbean. I've heard of that. I've never looked at these. I pretty much did everything in-house, and I found that it was a little bit more economical, and I maintained more control over that. And also, I like having my own team. I hired a part-time marketing person through a company called virtuallatinos.com. The owner of the company is in Mexico, and it's a staffing company. He places marketing people from Latin America with American companies, and I think it takes $2 an hour. And so I pay her a lot less I would anybody in America, with a really good bonus too. I mean, I pay her really well. And she's been with me over 2 years. She does all my social media. So what I do, I interview my guest, I send that to her along with all of our assets. I got my music from musicbakery.com, I think. I hired voiceover work from upwork.com. And I hired my editor who lives in Eastern Europe from upwork.com for $40 per episode. He edits everything. I can refer you to anybody if anybody's interested. I don't take any commission or anything like that. And so it took a while to get that built up, but I've got the infrastructure, but it's my team. And so all I do is interview the person. I send that to Gabriella, and then she sends it to Z, and then he edits it. She listens to it for quality. And then she also chooses which social media posts she wants to put on LinkedIn and also Twitter, which I don't know why we're still on there, but Twitter, I'm afraid to go off. I'm afraid something bad might happen to me. And then also Facebook too. And so she does all that. It took me a while to get to that point. I would choose, here are 3 or 4, 5 or 6 different parts of this. I want you to create an audiogram out of these, one of these, and then eventually, okay, you choose the ones you want to put on, and then basically you just do it all. She's not for hire for anybody else. People have asked me before. She's not, nope. And you can't get her, but talk to virtuallatinos.com and you'll be able to find your own team. And I'd be willing to bet economically that's more effective than outsourcing it to a podcast production company. It might take a little bit of time getting that boulder up the hill, but once you're there, it's your team, and it's a very economical way to do it.
And Scott, I have a second question. I mean, if you could maybe kind of go through in your mind the credibility and value of having a podcast versus maybe somebody who creates some sort of a blog where they try to create credibility through blogging. Do you see a big difference between the two? Do you do both? Would you do one before the other? What are your thoughts there?
That's a good question. I would absolutely do a podcast before a blog. Why is that? Because I have a commute, and most people kind of like having a commute again, not too much of one, but 20 minutes is good. A 20-minute, 25-minute show, I think, is enough for somebody to listen to. Or, I'm around the house, I'm doing chores, I'm on the treadmill. What am I doing? I'm not reading a blog, I'm listening to a podcast. So I think that in itself makes it an attractive media tool. I also think they have gained a lot of credibility. Now, I started podcasting with my recruiter training business way back in 2009. And if you listen to my podcast, if you scroll all the way back then. You'll hear some of the old ones. I mean, no judgment, quality wasn't as good back then. But I think that would be a way to go because it's an acceptable tool. I mean, you've got CNN, you've got NPR that have their own podcasts. Big media companies have podcasts. It's accepted. Nobody thinks it's kind of kitschy. And also, it's easy to share that asset directly with clients. Whenever I have a new candidate, as I get to know that candidate, if I get their text number, I'm going to get a certain show. I interviewed this person 6 months ago. I thought this particular episode might be interesting to you. Let's keep in touch. And I can send it through my iPhone, and there it shows up with a nice graphic. And they can just press it and play. They're in their car. And so I think just that functionality in itself lends it to be a much more effective asset than a blog.
Cool. Okay. Thank you.
Great stuff. Got one more question and a little bit of a comment followed by a question. So this is from Nancy Phipps, who you know as Nancy Bayerly. And she says, you've been a major force in her business for the last 10 or so years. And thank you for all of that. And what do you consider the best mix of retained versus contingent opportunities to grow a business?
Yeah, thank you, Nancy. Great to hear from you. And I don't come to Alexandria that often. We moved to Richmond. But what was the question again, Veronica? Was it?
What do you consider the best mix of retained versus contingent opportunities to grow a business?
It depends on what works best within your client model. When I did construction, that was my old niche. I started off doing contingent, started doing a little bit of a fee, and then pretty much, okay, you want me to work on it? It's going to cost you money up front. Retainer, more of a contingent plus a modified retainer. Some people call it container. Don't ever tell your client that. It's like saying it's retingency. They don't know what that means. Call it an engagement fee. It mitigated the risk, meaning I've got somebody that has skin in the game. I'm also setting clear expectations. And when you've got a brand, you can kind of command that sort of authority. When I got into professional services, I realized that, man, these firms are all screwed up. You've got 15 people trying to make a decision. Can you get 15 people to agree on where they're going to eat for lunch? No. And I have to deal with that. And so within my niche, it's less of I'm going to work for this one firm. I'm going to fill this one specific person because there's an acute problem, rather than we have a priority to grow this practice area. And I'm going to find these other 50 different candidates and see which of these 50 people fit within these 10 different firms. And it's more of a matching game / MPC game. It took me a while to figure that out. It took me a lot of frustrated hours of working with firms on retainers before I realized that within that particular niche, it's not the most effective way to work, at least not the way I want to work. So I think you have to look at, is it the right model for you within your niche? If you're working in an organization where there is a very clear problem not being solved because there's a gap, and you have someone that has clear authority to sign a contract, pay you, and make a decision without a committee that can veto it, and there's a finite deadline where they have to fill it before a certain time period, and you've got that trust, yes, that is an ideal retained engagement. Maybe not a third and a third and a third, a third of the proposed retained fee, next third paid when candidate accepts, and final third paid on start date. That might be the best way to do that in that particular situation. And by the way, some of the things we talked about with the podcasting and all that, that's going to be a very big part of what we talk about on the one-day recruiting intensive in Washington on March 15th.
Good stuff. I'm not seeing anything else coming in. I'm gonna see if Dave has any parting comments. I have a little wrap up I'll do otherwise.
I don't have anything to add at this point, but thank you very much, Scott. That was both informative and interesting, and like your style. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dave.
Yeah.
Thank you, Veronica. You've
You're
got a great
welcome.
organization.
Thank
I'm
you.
very, very happy to be affiliated with you all.
Thank you so much. Great to have you back. It's been a long time, so it's nice to have you back in the fold. And again, everyone, take a look at recruitingisagame.com for that masterclass coming up next month, or one-day recruiting intensive for anyone who's going to be in DC. And we're looking forward to seeing everybody in Salt Lake City in early May. Thanks so much for being here today, and have a great rest of your day.